Good evening, friends and colleagues joining from South Asia, and also welcome to all those who are joining from other time zones. And also Kanak, welcome. We had a chat with the others, but I'll say a few things about how this runs in a little bit. But to get the program going, we all know that the 2024 Sri Lankan Presidential Election that was held on 21st of September this year was the 9th presidential election in Sri Lankan history. It was also the most peaceful in recent times, despite being held without an official police chief. He was kind of missing in action, to put it mildly. The election attracted a very long list of candidates, most of whom were immaterial in any real terms. We had some, I think, 30 something, but most of them made no sense. In real terms, it turned out to be a three-way contest between Mr. Sajith Premadasa of the Samagi Jana Balavegaya, Mr. Anurakumara Disanayaka of the National People's Power, and Mr. Ranil Wickramasinghe, who ran as an independent candidate despite being the leader of the United National Party, one of Sri Lanka's oldest political parties. That itself says quite a bit. When the first vote count was concluded, no candidate had won a majority exceeding 50%, which is a first for Sri Lanka. And Mr. Disanayaka won a plurality of the votes in that context with 42.31%, followed by Mr. Premadasa with 32.76%, and Mr. Wickramasinghe won only 17.27% of the vote. So, since no candidate won a majority over 50%, a second round of preferential vote counting was held, which again was a first for Sri Lankan history. On 22nd September, Mr. Disanayaka was declared the winner, winning 5,740,179 votes, and Mr. Premadasa winning 4,530,902 votes. Now, Disanayaka was inaugurated on 23rd September as the 9th executive president of the country in a very simple, short, and by all indications, a very frugal ceremony. This is also quite unusual for Sri Lanka. Usually these things are very elaborate, tamasha kind of things with music and religion and food and whatnot, military attendance and all of that. The election signified what we can generally agree as a fairly important political realignment in Sri Lanka. Mr. Disanayaka ran a campaign that promised change, prosperity, and end to corruption, all of which resonated well with most people and explained to a large extent the way he fared and how people voted. On the other hand, his background also had much to do with why many of them also did not vote for him. And this is something we should be talking about. Now, the country is run by a skeleton caretaker cabinet of 3, and parliamentary elections have been called for 14th November 2024. So, in this context, which is all very recent history, we are here to discuss if the results of the presidential election has any relevance to the politics of South Asia. The region, despite its various political divisions, is also connected in ways least expected at times, not only culture, at least in terms of what appears to be the case. So, for example, India's powerful government has lost much of its power in the last election, though it is still in control. I mean, it runs the government. But the future is not as clear as it was, let's say, 2 years ago. In Sri Lanka, the presidential election dismissed all major political parties and alliances to elect a president from a party and a coalition that have not held power before. So, Sri Lanka's popular uprising in 2022 seemed to have influenced, at least visually, and in terms of the rhetoric of protesters in Bangladesh's more recent uprising that saw the fleeing of its autocratic prime minister amidst considerable violence. So, what I was trying to say is that there are these similarities. I only gave two examples. Now, it doesn't mean that all of these things are connected to the others, but the similarities are, difficult to miss. So, the question that we want to pose is whether the result of the Sri Lankan presidential election have anything to say about where the country itself might be headed after the parliamentary election of November 14th, and more crucially, does it have anything to say about the future of regional politics and political alliances in the region? So this is what we are here to discuss. And to do so, we have three panelists who know well what they are supposed to talk about. So what I will do is, I will introduce these three panelists very briefly, all of them at the beginning, and then what I want to do is to go from one to another. But let me introduce them. Probably most of you know them already. Professor S.D. Muni is a long-time Sri Lanka watcher. He taught international relations and South Asian studies for nearly 4 decades at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, National University of Singapore, and much earlier, Banaras Hindu University and the University of Rajasthan. He served as India's special envoy to Southeast Asian countries and was also India's ambassador to Lao People's Republic between 1997 and 1999. Professor Muni was nominated to the first ever constituted National Security Advisory Board of India during 1990 and 91. He is the author of a number of important books and essays, including India's Neighborhood Policy, published in 1985, Pangs of Proximity, 1993, which deals with India-Sri Lanka relations, Foreign Policy of Nepal, 2016, and the most recent, Dabbling in Diplomacy, 2024, which I find extremely interesting because it's also very informal. Then we come to Mr. Kanakmani Dixit. He's a writer, journalist, and a kind of activist for things like dangerous things like democracy. And he's the founding editor of the magazine Himal South Asian. And I think, Kanak, today I got an email from Himal which has some write-up on what we are about to discuss. And he's also one of the most consistent ideologues for South Asian regionalism, and is one of the early authors of the idea of the South Asian University, along with Ashish Nandi and these kinds of other people. He initiated Film South Asia, a festival of democracy documentaries. In addition to his writing on politics and the idea of South Asia, he also writes books for children. Now, this is a very unusual combination. Things on politics and then on kids, for kids. He edited the book, The South Asian Sensibility, in 2012, and also wrote the intriguing children's book, Adventures of a Nepali Frog, in 2023. And he is based in Kathmandu. Then we come to Dr. Pradeep Peiris, who teaches political science at the Department of Political Science and Public Policy, University of Colombo. His writing has focused, focused on a number of themes, including electoral politics, which is the main reason why he's here today, issues of gender, the liberal economy, and the democratic discourse in Sri Lanka, among many others. He is also the director and treasurer of the Social Scientists Association in Colombo, which is one of the country's oldest and active social science think tanks, I would say. So now that you know who we are dealing with, and colleagues and friends, thanks for coming. I know all three of you are very busy. So what I want to do is this. Pradeep, You are the local guy and the local expert. So take 15 minutes or so and explain to us what the hell has happened. That something happened, and I explained that this is a interesting realignment of politics. So how would you explain this, the patterns, and what can we expect in November, if you can figure that out, please?
Thank you, Sasanka. Thank you, Colombo Institute, for inviting me, and also I feel honored to be in this panel with pretty serious South Asian scholars. I think Sasanka gave us a very good outline of what happened September 21st. And I basically, when I was preparing for this meeting, I was thinking of sharing 4 points with you all. I mean, first point I want to highlight here is what this election highlighted, or at least the one of the main messages of this election that I like to appreciate is the how resilience is our Sri Lankan democracy, because this isn't a subject where we've been criticizing and we've been saying that it has lost its power to self-reflect and self-reform, but finally this election, and particularly since 2022, this Aragalaya, this popular uprising, and now you have the transformation at the election, that says something big about the democracy and democracy in South Asia. Because democracy is the only form of governance that has a capacity to think, reflect, reform, and do the self-correction. So in that way, I guess this election gives us something very positive feeling about the nature of our politics. So in that way, I'm very happy. But also, I think one of the most important thing what this election tell us is not necessarily relevant to Sri Lanka, maybe even not necessarily only limited to South Asia. This is much more larger political shift, transformation that the world has been experiencing in a very subtle way that sometimes we may not have recognized or identified, in our popular discussion on politics. So what we see right now is that weakening of particular historical bloc that hegemonize the post-independent politics in Sri Lanka. I don't think this is only relevant to Sri Lanka. This also, we may see that happening in rest of the South Asia as well. Since 1940s, what we see, the kind of a political constellation was very much, influenced, very much designed, or very much, impacted by the way we have received our independence. So that has created a kind of a block that has fueled a type of democracy which one can call as a elitist democracy. So that basically managed to sustain its hegemony, its dominance over 75 years. This election shows that it has weakened. I'm not saying that it had ended. I mean, I don't think we must really rush in to make very the gala statement about dawn of new era. No, I don't think so. But the thing is, for the first time, we managed to show that a third party, a third force could emerge and can threaten the decades of hegemony of these main political elite classes. So I think that's very important. That was not just because of some sort of magic or special capacity that NPP and the JVP exhibited. I mean, we must also recognize that. I mean, I think what has happened was they have basically, NPP managed to come and basically represented the kind of a molecular transformation that the country is experiencing for ages. So they benefited out of that. So in that way, their transformation. But you see right now, the NPP, not necessarily, because all this time in election, what we have seen is through campaigning, through mobilization, parties was trying to rally support around them. But what we see with the NPP, like for a good 3-4 years, they've been basically like, transforming itself in a way to like, capture the, the character of this, the society, which is experiencing this kind of molecular transformation. So in that way, I guess, victory of NPP wasn't something very special. It is somehow something has to happen. So this time it was NPP. So if it was not NPP, another group would have come and really take that seat. I think this will apply to the rest of the South Asia as well. I mean, we can see certain traces like, emergence of someone like Imran Khan in Pakistan, maybe like, in the near future, the politics in Bangladesh may see this. So you see the kind of a break away from that old political constellation to kind of new political constellation. So in the future, whether the NPP manage to retain, I think we can discuss a little later, retain their political achievement for the entire term, that's a different question. But whether they manage to do it or not, they basically have changed the rules of the game to a great extent. I mean, we must not forget the fact that when NPP was like gaining 42%, the rest have been basically rallied around traditional parties like headed by Ranil Wickremesinghe and Sajid Premadasa. I mean, their game was pretty clear. I mean, I like to characterize this election in this way. Yes, of course, it's a three-way competition, but it's a two-cornered fight, two-cornered three-way competition. The reason why I say it's a two-cornered, despite there were three candidates, three fighters, the whole election was divided between two big, large ideas, whether to retain the system or to change the system. So in that way, like what we're seeing is like, the majority have rallied around this idea, picking the change in the system, giving more priority to the politics than economics. But we must not underestimate the fact that there's a sizable majority still rallies around this whole idea. I mean, what is this whole idea? Whole idea is basically it's a patronage-based democracy. I mean, they have not offered anything special as policies or ideology, but they have offered us like better Sri Lanka with more patronage, more material benefits. So, which is to say that as in South Asia, in Sri Lanka also, like the patronage still commands so much of electoral support. It's not done yet. So this is going to continue for some years to come. The other point that I also want to highlight is the fact that the crisis of the right, because all this time we were laughing at left, saying that the left were failing, left in a disarray, they couldn't really put things together. So what we see, like since I think 2005, you see that that there are various traces of like the right was like struggling to be more appealing to masses. So what we see, the emergence of NPP is also a kind of result of the failure or the crisis of right as well. So I mean, this is something going to resonate across South Asia as well, perhaps maybe beyond South Asia. So I guess now the current victory is it's a victory of Andakumar Dissanayake taking the entire country as one constituency. So which means that people have voted for somebody who's very very far from their own locality. But by the time when we come to parliamentary election, where people have to make choices with regard to someone who are very relatively closer to them. So I guess the patronage network that is being used for the last 75 years by these main parties will come very handy, like will become more powerful in the coming parliamentary election. So my feeling is, NPP might not be able to command a kind of a sizable majority for them to run the government alone. So in that way, the best case scenario where they will have to have a more alliances with the like-minded. But the worst case scenario would be like there where they will have to agree on a cohabitation with much more, very very with a rival faction with more a group which was basically there to undermine the NPP's work. So in that case, we will be sailing to a very hugely political, very serious political instability, uncertainty. So in I think the next few years to come, I see like more political instability than stability, more struggles. But I don't think that is only. I mean that instability should not really undermine the victory of NPP, because NPP has done something very substantial, because it has changed the center of gravity of Sri Lankan election from patronage to a certain level of good governance. So I think, so into the future, our political campaign, the contestation may revolve around that, and maybe there will be some subtle change. So I guess, one thing that we may have to learn from our election, this kind of election can only do so much. We must not expect a very radical, revolutionary changes. So there will be more contestation, more, more instability continues, because which means that politics going to continue in that way. So our path ahead going to be really a long and it's a winding road, through a long and winding road. So I guess this is something that South Asia should learn from this, in the sense change needs to happen, but that will happen in a much more subtle way. And change needs to happen in order to really come to terms with the molecular transformation that take place in our societies, because we are no longer living in 60s or 50s or maybe 70s. So I guess this is something that I really want to recognize in this election results. Thank you. Sasank, you're muted.
Sorry. Trust me, I just want to thank you and just say that we'll first go to the other two speakers also and then come back to a conversation. But I just want to add something to your observations, Pradeep, all of which are reasonable. And I hope that instability that we are worried about will not come, but then you never know. What I was thinking is that if you see, now we also know why this the new president called for parliamentary elections so soon. I mean, because you need to have a government that gives you some support, right? It doesn't exist right now. So, but on the other hand, it is what if between now and the 14th of November, what if certain very popular moves that can be done legally are done, like the bringing down of fuel prices and so on and so forth? If that can be legally done, then I was wondering, now I don't know whether these things will be done, but I'm simply wondering whether that might not change the scenario that you're talking. Right now it looks for the the NPP to get a majority, outright majority as such. Of course, they are saying they can. But if you do these popular things in that short period of time, then the kinds of people who are now wondering, who didn't vote for Mr. Dissanayaka, have we done some kind of mistake? And I get people talk to me all the time about this kind of thing. then I wonder, see, we may not have really calculated this well, right? I mean, so this is something that we should talk about when we come to our conversation after Professor Muni and Mr. Dixit. Professor Muni, I can't really see you, but you are here somewhere. No? So can you switch on your video, please? Ah, there you are. Thank you
Am I
very much.
audible now?
Yes, yes, you are audible and visible. So, I mean, I did listen to your podcast as well. So, what can you say? Do we
Well,
have a future?
I'll make a few observations as you
Sure.
suggested by you,
Okay.
and largely on the lines which both of you have already presented. To begin with, I think Anura's victory in Sri Lanka con- gives a greater momentum to the disenchantment of popular views in South Asia about the established leadership and established political parties and corruption and misgovernance. This has been going on for a long time. In fact, it started with the Maoists coming back to power in Nepal, which was also very unusual. Uh, it has been the Bangladesh situation where this became very acceptable. But let us see how that takes place. It seems that South Asian people have shed off the hesitation of electing inexperienced, new, untried leadership, as you mentioned very rightly. But you know, the problem is whether this momentum or this trend would be consolidated. And this is where the major problem is. Why I am raising this question that I have seen in South Asia people falling off the track. The Maoists completely fell off the track so far as Nepal was concerned. And I'm not very sure how the students in Bangladesh would show themselves up, which is also because the kind of extremist, religious, ideological assertions which are being raised in Bangladesh is somewhat disturbing to me. So I don't know, and I think this is a major challenge for Anura to get this momentum, to get this trend consolidated and take further only by performing what he has been promising. Because the previous South Asian leaders have not done so. So this is my first submission I wish to make. Secondly, Anura's major challenge is, of course, economy. And in economy, Sri Lanka has two models. One was Rajapaksa Gotabaya, who threw the international agencies out and you know uh, uh, did something on taxation, did something on pricing, and as a result precipitated a number one uh, most powerful economic crisis for Sri Lanka. The other model is of Ranil Wickremesinghe, where he has accepted everything which the international organizations have asked him to do, and as a result, put additional burden on the citizens, and they have again reacted against that. So for Anurag, he has to find a way in between. And way in between would really give a sort of inspiration and an example it would set for other South Asian countries, because most of the South Asian countries are debt burdened countries in one form or the other. I recall even India's time when, in the early 90s, 67 tons of gold was mortgaged in order to get 2.2 billion of the World Bank loan. This is a condition. All the countries are taking loan either bilaterally or through international agencies. And I think the way which Anurag finds out of this economic puzzle in Sri Lanka would really be watched with great interest and attention. And I hope that he brings out a sort of a new model which can be followed by other South Asian countries and other South Asian leaders. Thirdly, Anura has promised to change the political culture and political system of Sri Lanka. I tell you, this is easier said than done, because these political vested interests and stakeholders have entrenched themselves for a very, very long time. And they are very powerful. It is good to promise the change to them. And I think one after another, several leaders have failed to bring about change. I think the first test would come in the parliamentary elections as to how business behaves, how old political parties behave, how vested interests behave. And I'm not very sure if the parliamentary election route is going to be very easy for Anura, but he has to face that. And one wishes that he does not fail in that. Because when other specific questions, and I have two questions in my mind of the executive presidency and of resolving the national question. Now, executive presidency, again, people have tried. Chandrika tried to some extent, did not succeed. Many others promised, but they have not been able to do anything. And it depends how, because once he gets into power and he wants to make significant and radical changes, he would need power. And if he doesn't get the kind of support from parliament, he will have to struggle to keep his powers with him. And that would go against changing the executive presidency. So that again is a major challenge. And I mean, people are very hopeful. He has made very positive statements so far, but it remains in translating those words and promises into action, and it is not going to be easy. Similarly, the question of the ethnic question, national question in Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, Anura did not get Tamil votes. He got some Muslim votes, but not many Tamil votes, and there was still a lot of doubt. I wish if the Tamil who voted for Sajid Premadasa would have voted him, even in the second preference, he would have passed through very easily. Or first preference, he would pass through very easily after whatever he got. So it's a very critical. Unfortunately, even Tamil community and Tamil leadership is completely divided and badly fragmented. So to bring the whole thing together on board and all of them to work together in synergy with each other is again going to be a very, very difficult problem. And if these two problems are not addressed properly, with the beginning of, soon after parliamentary elections, the vested interest would exploit this situation by saying that, look, this is what Anura promised, this is what he had not been able to deliver, and they will do everything to discredit him. This is how I have seen happening in various other South Asian countries, and therefore, with all support and sympathy, I wish to caution him to take this action in a very concerted manner, a very committed and dedicated manner. The other danger which I find, which again I would list here, I would alert the new president, is falling into the trap of majoritarianism. This again is related to the ethnic and other issues. And here again, I have seen most of the South Asian countries are falling into the trap of majoritarianism. They are neglecting minorities, and they are neglecting not only that, I think they are turning their nationalism into a sectarian nationalism, which is based on either one religion, one language, one community, one ethnicity. And this is not a good recipe for developing South Asia in a manner that South Asia has been socially and culturally for centuries. So I think this again is related to the question of Tamil national problem, but Anura is known as a Sinhala leader, at least in the Tamil perception. I think he'll have to change this perception by actions, not simply by words. And that would be really great. And lastly, I would say, in terms of foreign relations, I'm quite hopeful and positive that Anura would be able to bring the usual balance which many other Sri Lankan leaders have managed. And I would say many other South Asian leaders are bringing about, particularly between India and China. I mean, there is no need for India to expect that all other neighbors would announce and declare India's primacy in the region. It is not necessary. I have been arguing against the Indian government for any length of time that we must give a lot more space to the neighboring countries in order to build a very productive and positive relationship with them. But let us see what happens. But I am sure, even before elections, probably the Indian leadership saw a streak of, if not charisma, a streak of leadership in Anura. They invited him to Delhi. They have had discussions. And I hope the parameters of mutual understanding would be built up further. Similarly, it is not going to be, and this is what India has to understand, that it is not going to be by sacrificing or distancing from China. Sri Lanka has old relations with China going back up to 1952, even earlier, but 52 certainly. And it must be understood in India. I think Indian policy makers are unnecessary getting panicky whenever the question of China comes up. This is largely an Indian problem, but I hope that after having discussions with Anura and by watching how he functions on the national scene, there would be much greater understanding of this change and this autonomy, what they call strategic autonomy, the resilience on the part of the smaller neighbor, Sri Lanka included, so that the relationship grows very smoothly and peacefully. I think I'll stop here.
Thank you, you're muted.
Sorry. I've given the scatterbrain that I might always forget that I'm muted. So, no, I was saying that I took some notes of what you were saying, particularly the last one, and that is the presence or the role of India in some of these things, particularly in the imagination of the new government. Now, I think the Indian foreign minister is supposed to come to Sri Lanka on the 4th of October or something like that. And as you are right, Mr. Dissanayake was invited to Delhi and had these very interesting, very high-profile looking meetings with a number of Indian officials. I assumed at that time, because they must have figured that this result was possible. But you also have to. I mean, one of the things that Indian governments also don't seem to learn sometimes is what you have to learn from other countries where things have not gone well. For example, Bangladesh and Maldives in terms of relations with India. And I find it very important what you said, that a country doesn't have to be considered hegemonic or overtly powerful to have decent relations with neighbors. And I wonder whether the new Sri Lankan government, once it's formed, not just with this election but with the next, whether it will be business as usual in its relations with India and China, or whether there will be some kind of a engaged conversation of to maintain some kind of a seemingly independent foreign policy, because right now it's maintained under extreme stress. I ought to add one more thing, and then we'll go to Kanat. See, there is nothing you can do about the fact that Mr. Dissanayake is a Sinhala leader, because he comes from that ethnic group. But the question that I think we have to ask is, to what extent was his campaign ethnicized, or whether it had that majoritarian tinge to it in the way that we have come to accept from or expect from political parties, mainstream political parties. And I didn't really see that this time. And I also didn't see that with the other parties. And I have a feeling that relative absence probably came from the nature of the campaign of Mr. Dissanayaka's coalition. But it remains to be seen whether that will continue in action, as you're saying, because given the fact that his recognition or acceptance in Tamil majority areas were, negligible, right? But that is precisely why I think that the new government, once it's formed, should engage with people who did not vote for him. I mean, this is one of the things he actually said in the inauguration, that he has to find ways in which to gain the trust of the people who did not vote for him. Anyhow, all this for the future. So, Kanak, my friend, it's so good to see you after a very long time. What do you think now? You are more of a South Asia watcher than most of us. Now, do you think this result, or the way this has gone and likely to go in the way that Pradeep was talking about, does it have any, I mean, is there any resonance for Nepal or beyond? What do you think?
Well, I think every reason for optimism. We don't need to be pessimistic until the time comes to be pessimistic. And so when people say, well, let's see what Anura Dissanayake will do. Yes, indeed, that's in the future. But the results of the elections in Sri Lanka is energizing for the rest of us in South Asia. Having heard Professor Muni, I'm glad he brought up the China factor, and I hope later in the conversation we can get into both the India factor and the China factor vis-a-vis the neighboring countries, including Sri Lanka. Going to what Pradeep was saying, it is indeed a long and winding road. It is forever and long and winding road when you're considering politics in the country, because it's a forever process. Look at what is happening in the United States, and you don't need to say anything more. And so in that sense, we just have to look at Sri Lanka's departure at the moment, and firstly, take satisfaction that it is a radical departure, but hopefully there will be changes that will be triggered by this radical departure. But it was radical, but it was a peaceful transfer of power and the arrival of a new president. So that itself is a plus. Now, up ahead are all the challenges for Mr. Anura Dissanayake. That would be, he's a politician, and clearly he's been talking, he's not talking what we all consider to be the radical JVP language of decades ago. Since most of us are not regular Sri Lanka watchers, we've always been a little alert and wary about the acronym JVP, because it means a Marxist extremist organization that did challenge the state through arms, 71, 86, 87. So in that sense, to see that there has been a maturing over the years, and over the years in the wilderness, if I might say so, up from 3% vote just in 2019, which means Mr. Dissanayake and the NPP were in the wilderness till 2019, and now with 42%, it means that some surge, obviously having to do with the Aragalaya and probably the economic downturn, has led to this very welcome change. And I take it and I understand that this is a departure from the elitism that has ruled Sri Lanka's politics since the 1940s. And so the challenge is to maintain this breakaway and keep a momentum. And I don't know whether he should rely on the kind of populist gestures you were suggesting, Sasanka, because such populist gestures, you'll have to live with it after you get your parliamentarians elected, and he'll have to count that and take that into calculation as well. I would say some kind of an ideology propagated in the coming months, which will give people hope without having to even talk about the IMF. Somehow to say we have different goals than the standard goals that governments have tried to sell you till now. And I can't even tell you, make a suggestion what it can be, but something to lift the spirit of the common person, given that they've gone to one vote, now they should go to another vote. So I feel something to catch the fancy, but not only as a populist measure. This is as far as I want to say, talk about Sri Lanka, not knowing what's happening there too well. And as I said, down the line, I would like to talk a little bit about the India factor and the China factor. But since you introduced me, Sasanka, as a South Asia guy, by the way, all of us are South Asian guys, especially Professor Muni, who's here. But let me make a point. There have been changes in all around South Asia and in the middle of South Asia, i.e. India. There's been a deceleration of the politics of the BJP, RSS, and Mr. Modi within India with the last elections. But for now, since we're talking about the neighbors, the Pakistani army is being challenged as never before in Pakistan. Not just by Imran Khan, but there are movements in Balochistan, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, elsewhere. We don't know where that will end. We don't know where that will go. And we don't know how violent it will become when the military intelligence and the military brass decides this has gone too far. But there is movement in Pakistan, which we tend to not to study too much because we tend to conflate the Pakistani people and the Pakistani state. So overall, all around South Asia, there is the empathy towards the Pakistani people is lacking, but something is happening in Pakistan. But let's talk about the other three countries. Sri Lanka, with the departure of the old brass and the arrival of Mr. Dissanayake. Bangladesh, with the fleeing in a helicopter of Sheikh Hasina and Professor Yunus in place, and Nepal, where a Maoist chieftain, and I will call him that, chieftain, who had only 11% vote in the parliament, has seen his comeuppance just a few months ago, which means that, and I'm not seeing these people in contrast to New Delhi. Certainly, Mr. Oli, the new Prime Minister in Kathmandu, is seen as somebody who would challenge India if required. Although I would also ask and hope that he plays it cool. Similarly, in Bangladesh, Professor Yunus is able to have a eye-to-eye discussion, as Sheikh Hasina could not with the Indian leadership in Delhi, and over in Colombo, and as yet to be tried new president. By the way, your ex-president, Mr. Gotabaya, is in Nepal right now. If at least he was in Lumbini yesterday, and I presume he's still in Nepal. And may long he remain in exile is all I can say for now. Why do I talk about the capitals, Dhaka, Kathmandu, and Colombo? I feel that there is a need for South Asian regionalism. South Asian regionalism has been weakened because Mr. Modi, at the geographical center of South Asia, is a reluctant regionalist. But I believe that he can be persuaded if there is a sober coming together of neighbors saying we need to do this together for the sake of our people, for the sake of social justice, for the sake of climate crisis, for the sake of rising oceans, for the sake of vectors that are moving around, for the sake of the haze that is covering all our cities and not just India and Pakistan. So if there is a kind of a soft front between Kathmandu, Colombo, and Dhaka, to talk firstly among themselves and not in a way that New Delhi, which tends to be a little prickly on these matters, should fear that there is an attempt to gang up. That is the typical term used by some New Delhi analysts, that the neighbors are trying to gang up. So ab initio, puncture that balloon, no effort to gang up, but to say, let us rise together. I personally feel that this is an opportunity beyond the future of Sri Lanka and its polity. The changes in Kathmandu, Colombo, and Dhaka should be utilized for the sake of regional peace and amity, which will automatically lead to I think, where we want to really go. As far as Sri Lanka is concerned, the Sri Lankan, you will be able to tell me how South Asian do Sri Lankans feel vis-a-vis how South Asian a Nepali feels or a Bangladeshi feels. On occasion in the past, there have been a sense that Sri Lanka, in Colombo, I've met friends who say we'd rather latch our wagon to Southeast Asia rather than South Asia. But I think one can do both. And there is no hard and fast rule that everybody should be in the same boat together. You can have your feet on two boats and have a nice sail. So I would just end at this point by saying, Sasanka, that great that there's been change in Colombo. Great that it has not been a move towards anarchy. Great that an entity that we had thought and heard and have believed has been a radical force, the JVP, a radical force that supports Sinhala majoritarianism, actually has been changing its stance. Let it not go back like a spring for the sake of electoral politics to where the previous regimes were in terms of majoritarianism. That is as far as Sri Lanka is concerned. As far as the rest of South Asia is concerned, we are in a great place right now with the changes in all countries, and if I might say so, the weakening of the RSS BJP front that Mr. Modi represents. It should lead us towards a softening of attitudes towards each other and movement towards more collaboration for the sake of social justice and economic growth and equity of all of South Asia, which does consist of a fourth of the world's population. That's what I have to say in the beginning.
Thank you very much, Kanak. Let me, I'm trying to, okay, couple of things. See, all three of you were saying something about, we use these terms, JVP and NPP, fairly interchangeably. Now, see, recently I wrote a kind of a critique of, sort of advisory kind of critique in the Sinhala language, which was supposed to be published in a government or newspaper, which was turned down. But one of the things I said in that is kind of in response to, some of the things that came up here. And that is, see, why people didn't vote for the Mr. Dissanayaka in the way that they might have is because of the inability of most voters to recognize the difference between the JVP, the kind of JVP that you referred to, Kanak, and this new coalition, which has something like 26 organizations in it, and JVP is only one of them. Now, the reason, I think, why a lot of people didn't vote for Mr. Dissanayaka, and that may or may not change from now to the 14th, is because they were unable to make that distinction between this new NPP, which contested the elections, and the JVP of the past. Because, I've had so many conversations with people, they were afraid of certain things like, their second car might be nationalized, the second house might be taken over by those kinds of fears. Now, the problems that I've always had with my friends in the NPP is that fear was never really addressed because they thought this will probably go away. I don't think it's that simple. If you are looking at another election in times to come, and these are the kinds of things that will also make a difference in the way that the Sri Lankan situation may or may not impact the rest of the region, because to impact the rest of the region, one way or another, you also have to have some reasonable control of, otherwise the system will collapse. Now, about what you were saying, Kanak, about the way in which that a new kind of amalgamation of like-minded people towards a regionalism might emerge. Now, this is also one of the concerns I have, and Pradeep, you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, and that is, I don't really see so far a very a kind of a sensible take on the part of the president's party on foreign relations, including with India, right? And that really concerns me, because for reasons that you have said, and also for what Professor Muni has said, because we need to get a handle on this as a supposedly an independent country, because we can't play. It's very difficult. It is counterproductive in my mind to play a kind of an amateurish hand in foreign relations when it comes to both India and China. And I don't think we should be able, we should not be put into a position where one has to choose one or the other. And this is where Professor Muni is very right. That the relationships with these two countries for Sri Lanka is very different from some of the other neighbors in the region. So that difference has to be recognized by both these powers, and that difference has to be explained by us. Now, whether that kind of thing can be, whether that kind of sophistication in foreign relations is coming from this group at the moment is something I don't see. Doesn't mean it cannot be done, but at the moment, that is not something that I see. Okay, now that we've had this conversation, Pradeep, coming back to you, I was intrigued by this concern that you had that things might not be stable in times to come, but and I also see, if it was up to me, I keep telling people I would have postponed this election by few months, but then I'm not a politician also, and I also know why it was done. So, but isn't there anything on the ground coming from the surveys that you may have done and which you may have access to show that that the kind of attitude that people showed in the presidential election might change, might be on the mend in favor of the president's party? Because I haven't really seen it, because I'm not, and that is probably a concern, but because it will be a kind of a disaster if you have a president from one party and you have a parliament that is not supportive of his policies, right? What do you think?
I share, I mean, all three of your, desires about, once you have a new government, new president who will voice a very clear, very straightforward, policy, not only the Sri Lankan economic policies, but also policy towards foreign relations. I mean, all these things are, I mean, even I would like to see that. But as it says, the beggars can't be choosers. I mean, Sri Lanka, we don't have that many cards with us, and particularly the NPP doesn't have at all, because on the one hand, they are really have to sail through this hugely problematic, challenging economic period, right? So in that case, they have no capacity to antagonize or make anyone angry with them. So you can see that prior to the election, they've been conversing with various organizations. In fact, at one meeting, I've seen that how poor television serial had to sit and listen to Chamber of Commerce, senior officials was denouncing Marxism and saying that neoliberalism is the way forward. So NPP has to go to that extent in order to give a message to the Sri Lankan as well as to the foreign, international community that they are not intent to make a radical shift from the line. I mean, if you look at the Sri Lankan past election and most of the South Asian and Global South past election, I mean, people will go and vote, but the selection and the decision green light come from the international community. Like, we can't really have a president by antagonizing India, by antagonizing global power. So I think NPP did so much of work in order to really win trust among the international community, also with the local business community, to say that they are not going to change things radically. So that's why I don't think they will be able to offer anything radical or anything sound, something different to what others have put forward. But coming back to your questions about now, we were thinking of, I mean, the reason why I'm cynical, I mean, of course, being a political scientist, I tend to think very critically and also more cynical towards the politics. But what you see now during the election, if you look at the two rival factions, Ranil Wickremesinghe and Premadasa's faction, and who basically helped them, who basically rallied around them, all those old politicians rallied around them. Why they rallied around them? Does that mean that they really like Premadasa or Wickremesinghe? No, not necessarily. They rallied around them because they want to basically survive for another day, for them to come and contest the parliamentary election successfully. So by camping up with Premadasa and Wickremesinghe, they basically saved they secure the position and opportunity for them to contest the parliamentary election, because they know that election they are going to fight in their own ways. I mean, patronage democracy in South Asia didn't start yesterday. This has been there since the nation state was built, and even goes beyond that. From 1930s, when Sri Lanka started exercising franchise. So it's a very much of an embedded, very much grounded system. So politicians so far very fluent in that system. So that is exactly why I feel at the time of election, NPP has its own natural limitation, because they cannot really go to election with the patronage, because they presented themselves as an anti-patronage, the political alliance on good governance and more on social democracy. So therefore, there's no chance for them to do that. But whereas the most of the politicians who basically already enjoying the support of local network, which was very much connected with the local cultures, they're going to exercise, they're going to mobilize those networks. So that's why I feel, I mean, even though under Kumar Dissanayake managed to make 52% of the votes, but parliamentary seat, I don't see him getting, the NPP getting more than 60-70 seats. So I mean, these are very, very rough, ballpark figures. But in that case, there are only two options: either to expand and really invite the like-minded people into their broader coalition, or otherwise basically to have a kind of a cohabitation, something that we experienced back in 2002 to 2004. But this time, if they had to go for a cohabitation, it's going to be extremely problematic and difficult, because they are extremely, I mean, ideologically opposing, in terms of democratic ethos, they're two different camps. So, I mean, old elite will do their best to undermine the NPP. So there are two options: either to win larger election, number of seats, or otherwise you turn into more oppressive, more authoritarian, system. So I hope NPP will not pick the latter. So that's why I feel things are not going to be that smooth into the future. But that is not something that I'm very upset or I regret. I think this is something ought to happen. I mean, that is the path through which Sri Lanka would sail. Yep. I'll stop here, sorry.
All right, thank you. No, we are not here to anyway talk about kind of fairy tales. So we have to, that is the whole idea, to get an assessment of what is likely to happen and what is likely to happen and what is possible. So before I go to the other speakers, I will also open this up for people in the audience to respond or field any questions. Lakshman, go ahead, please. I saw your hand going up.
Thanks, Sasanka. I saw this notification by just chance and grabbed it. I am actually privileged to know Pradeep and Kanak very well. Professor Muni, I met just once many years ago at a CSDS meeting in Delhi, and he invited me actually then and there to address the South Asia cluster at the IDS. I remember. I have actually written twice already in local foreign affairs columns about the geopolitical impact of the arrival of JVP or the NPP in South Asia. I won't expand on all that. I'd like to emphasize 2 points. One is the fact that in this election, we have seen the Sri Lankan subaltern coming to power, right? There's no question about it. He's a subaltern, right? And in that, I think Kanak is also resonates when he talks about similar changes in Kathmandu, in possible change in stirrings of a change in Dhaka. And also, I would also equate this with, although Imran Khan is not a subaltern by any means, he's an outsider, right? So a third party, right? There is a certain, in that, there's a certain dynamic of a move towards populist moves towards some kind of change from the old Enchong regime in South Asia. There is at least in these three countries. Of course, NPP is not the hardline Maoist that the JVP is. Neither is it the hardline Maoist that the Maoist Party of Nepal is. Right? The Maoist Party of Nepal did not compromise in its program to the degree that the JVP has compromised in building the NPP. Right? The JVP remains, my view, too much of a doctrinaire Marxist party, but the NPP is not. And that's astute action by the JVP in building. It's, of course, a classic Leninist model of a mass organization coalition. The Maoist Party of Nepal also the same thing. But the NPP is very much not Marxist. That's my perception. And I agree with Pradeep that we are in for a situation of stability. I personally am a friend of the current presidency, ideologically. But I agree with Pradeep that they are going in for a kind of stability. And I'm intrigued by the risk the JVP is taking in going for elections so fast. Because I think there's a good chance of any possibility of constitutional change being negated if the NPP fails to win parliamentary elections. So they're not going to commit suicide, right, by going for parliament. So I don't see major changes. Of course, the JVP, the only handle I think the JVP has is in prosecuting past corruption, right? That's the only handle, and I think they are the only part which promised it. And I think there will be a major response to that if they do it fairly successfully. But they have to do it fast. They can't promise economic goodies because the Supreme Court has already cut down one attempt to do so. So that's not an easy thing to do. JB is very much comfortably still in a singular-centric vote bloc. The so-called Aragale for me is very much a singular-centric rebellion against the ultranationalist leadership of the time. And that good half of that voting bloc has gone to the JVP. It cannot vote for Tamil vote because it is too singular-centric still and needs to get out of that rut. It's aware of it, I think, right? But they are all coming from the same cultural mode. The most important thing I think is the first election in whole of South Asia of a subaltern. Thanks.
Thank you, Lakshman.
I can say much
Kanak-
more, but I won't.
No, that's all right. Thanks a lot. About the subaltern thing, now Chandrika Bandaranayake has opened her big mouth about this subaltern thing, and it has really landed a lot of people in trouble, particularly her. But we'll come to that. But Kanak has to leave at 8 our time, and we also need to end. But Chandra, this question about the new regime's topmost responses, is this to any of the panelists, or is this something that should be discussed by the regime itself, somebody in the regime? It wasn't very clear to me. Your question is, what are the three topmost responses of the new regime be in managing its manifesto versus stakeholder expectations? Now, I don't really know whether somebody like Pradeep or someone can answer that question. That's, to me, seems to be something that should go to someone in the setup. Professor Muni, is there anything you would like to add to this conversation at this point?
Hello, your
Yeah.
question, Frank?
Go ahead.
No, what was your specific question?
No, I was asking whether there was anything you would like to add to this conversation so far. If not, we will go to Mr. Jayaratna's question.
Couple of points, if you permit me.
Sure,
One is
go ahead.
that what Kanak said, that Modi or Indian leadership is a reluctant regionalist. I am not sure if I would agree with that, because the problem, it is true that Modi has stopped SARC, but that is largely due to Pakistan. Otherwise, on BIMSTEC, it has taken Nepal and Bhutan on the board. The problem of Pakistan is integrated with India's domestic politics. And this is where the problem is. And secondly, even Pakistan has been extremely reluctant so far as the connectivity issue is concerned. They would not let India be connected with Afghanistan. You know, Shashank and Kanak, the problem in the region is, of course, India-Pakistan is a major problem. But the problem in the region is also with other neighbors who do not know how close is not too close to India. Unfortunately, our economies and our societies and our geographies are such that we have to interact and integrate with each other much more than we can do it with anybody else. And this is an idea which is not acceptable in many of the capitals, largely for political reasons or knee-jerk reactions. As you raised this question of a balanced foreign policy. Now, this is where the problem is. This is one point which I wanted to underline. Secondly, when these countries look at their foreign policy in terms of India-China, don't forget that the region is under the spell of a greater rivalry between US and China. And this quite interestingly and quite intensively affects not only the foreign relations, but even domestic politics in many of these countries. Let us not forget about that. Even, I don't want to go into details, but the Bangladesh question, even Sri Lanka's Argalaya question, even Nepal question, even within India. Now, these two rivalries are impinging simultaneously, and therefore responses have to be, catered to meet these two challenges. And thirdly and lastly, I would say that if President Anura Dissanayake loses the parliamentary elections, the whole agenda of a new political culture would get derailed. I have absolutely no doubt. The kind of political changes, systemic changes, which he promises to bring about would be more of a talk. And I'm afraid, as I said as other radicals in South Asia have fallen flat, or deviated from their track record. Unfortunately, even Mr. Dissanayake may fall into that situation if the parliamentary support is not forthcoming to him.
Thank you, Professor. There is a question from Mr. Chandra Jayaratna, and I would slightly rephrase it. Then it's an interesting question. What he's asking is, what would be the topmost responses of the new regime can be in managing its manifesto versus stakeholder expectations? Now, I don't think I know Sri Lankan politics well enough yet to respond that. But Pradeep, you might be the best guy in this group of people to say something about that.
Yeah,
I mean, this is an important question because manifesto is one thing, but I mean, you yourself said is keeping people, and this is also what Professor Muni just said, keeping
Yeah.
people satisfied is quite another thing, right?
I think the topmost challenge and topmost priority of any leader is basically somehow retain the power, maintain, whatever they have managed to gain, now they want to retain and sustain it, and if possible, expand it. So that should be the first priority. So for that, I guess the NPP will also do what is necessary to do that. So I guess number one would be it may have a very careful, very careful with the economy and try to walk on a tight rope in order to not to seem very much giving into IMF, but yet maximize the maximum benefit of IMF as well as other various stakeholders to manage the economy. So irrespective of whether it's Andhra Kumar Dissanayake or Ranil Wickremesinghe or Sajid Premdas, next few years the economy is going to be challenging anyway, because the moment we start paying our debts and interest, we will have a very different situation. So they are going to really walk on tight rope as far as the economy is concerned. So I think they will look into that as one of the first priority. And also, I think they have already started, going after those criminals, going after the people that they have criticized of stealing the state resources. I think that would be also get a priority for two reasons. One is basically as a part of their electoral promise, but also this is how they can also, launch the campaign for coming parliamentary election. So and then also things like Easter bombing. There are a lot of the long list that they have promised. So perhaps I guess they will do that, but at the same time, they will also make a extremely. They will also make a huge effort to be seen as a catalyst for change without really shaking the apple cart. I guess it's a change without make the change, but also without making it too much of shake there. So I guess that is what I feel they would prioritize the next few months to come.
Sorry. I keep on doing this. Upul, you have a question, right?
Yeah. Thank you so much. So my question is related to that what Pradeep mentioned at one point that regarding the NPP, they had to actually. I also listened to that talk that at the business forum, one of the business leaders, I think DSI former chairman, he mentioned that now that the Marx or Engels, they are no longer. Yeah, they are no longer valid, but we have to go ahead along with the free market or the thing. So even Tilden Silva and many prominent leaders were there. So I think so what NPP in that regard, they wanted to sort of get into the sort of mainstream in the sense and that attracting votes, people's vote. But my question is, while NPPs, they were trying to do, to adjust and trying to accommodate this mainstream political economic policies, but why especially since Mr. Kanak is here, I think, and Professor Muni, why the Indian media, they continuously labeled NPP or the Anura as a Marxist or someone like, Marxist leftist always. They continuously use that term, whereas they use, especially like, for example, the media like Vion and the First Post and so on. They use like sort of centrist for Sajid Premadasa. So I'm just wondering, like, any thoughts around it? Why is that like something purposeful act or something like unknowingly they did? That is my question. And regarding, I have one comment about this upcoming parliamentary election. I think that is the best thing that NPP, the government, that could do at this moment, because my calculation, my guess is that NPP can get the majority, given the, like, even going ahead with what the current vote base that they got from the presidential election. I think there are calculations saying that at least 100 plus seats they will get alone only with these current votes. But I'm sure in the coming months they will be able to attract new voters that who did not vote for Anura in the presidential election. So I think that is really important and needed thing, because without having that, I mean, they couldn't go ahead with that the previous parliament, given the compulsion and of the parliament. So I think my personal understanding is that is the best thing that they could do, and it's a risk. It's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think that must be done, and they should be able to do that. So thank you.
We'll conclude this in a little bit, but Kanak, do you have anything to add to this conversation so far? You are muted, Kanak.
I have lots to say.
Please go ahead.
One is regarding looking to my notes just now, just something that came up. What about Indian media? Because the way to be a good South Asian is to be able to critique each other's countries. Indian or New Delhi-based analysts critique the rest of us with abandon. So we should be fully able to critique New Delhi's doings with abandon. And in that spirit, let me just say that Indian media, there was a question about the Indian media, by and large, Indian legacy media, particularly Indian print media and Indian mainstream television, not YouTube, mainstream television, they are basically reading off the handout from South Bloc. I mean, if we understand that, then we don't need to talk more about the attitudes and the angles used by Indian media. The only sad part is that Indian media is so powerful that it influences the rest of us. Like if I'm in Kathmandu, I'll be influenced about how New Delhi media, by the way, let me make the distinction between New Delhi and India. New Delhi media's views on, for example, how Sri Lankan political forces are described, as the earlier speaker, Mr. Vikramasinghe perhaps talked about. We will, because we can't always be on guard, so we will take on what New Delhi media feeds us about Sri Lanka. Likewise, Sri Lankans will probably take on what the New Delhi academia and some parts of academia and some media say about Nepal. So, and plus, New Delhi media is also able to influence the larger world of Western media, because most of their South Asia correspondents are based in Delhi. And so they get socialized in that circle. That's one point vis-a-vis media. Now, I would make one point here vis-a-vis the recent changes in Nepal elections, as well as a new government, as well as the debacle of the Awami League in Dhaka. There was more of an New Delhi involvement there than I see presently in Sri Lanka for now. Because I don't see, it doesn't resonate to me as much that there was a lot of manipulation and interventionism on the part of New Delhi, which in a way, what has happened in Nepal and especially in Sri Lanka, in Bangladesh, is the reaction to Indian interventionism. Now, Professor Muni talked about my comment regarding Mr. Modi, the reluctant regionalist. Firstly, we need to distinguish between SARC and South Asia. SARC is a part of the South Asian concept and movement. But just to talk about SARC, I think it was not appropriate to scuttle SARC. The last SARC summit was in 2014 in Kathmandu, and Nepal has been left holding the bag as chairman since 2014 till now, 12 years later, mainly because New Delhi does not want the summit to happen in Islamabad. And yes, the given excuse was that Islamabad was not willing to allow road access to Afghanistan for Indian goods. But I think that is short-sighted for the kind of advantages the SARC organization can have for India as well. And it should not have been blocked for that ostensive region. About Mr. Modi again, because he's at the center of New Delhi and New Delhi is in the center of South Asia. When I say he's a reluctant regionalist, he prefers to conduct his foreign policy bilaterally within South Asia, hoping that the sum will be more than the parts, or maybe not even hoping that. I would say, I just prefer one example. When the so-called South Asia Development Satellite was launched in 2014, it was done with a lot of fanfare, but New Delhi had never consulted with any of the chief executives in the neighboring countries. That is as much as I would say about SARC and India's role in scuttling it thus far. I am firmly of the belief that firstly, South Asia is different than SARC as such. SARC is a part of the idea of South Asia. Nevertheless, SARC summit must be held. And this is where I'm a little worried from Pradeep, I think it was, that to hear that perhaps the NPP has not yet articulated its foreign policy enough. It should have. If it's in power with the power of the presidency is in its hands, it must have articulated foreign policy and policy vis-a-vis South Asia. And what I would hope would be that NPP, the new president, Dissanayaka, would be able to make common cause, as I said earlier, with Kathmandu and Dhaka, to reach out and to suggest a revival of SARC, number one. Number two, to go far beyond SARC, to start considering South Asian issues. As far as China and India, let me just make one small point about why South Asia. You see, there is stubble burning after the monsoon, and twice a year in Indian Punjab, Sindh, and Pakistani Punjab, Sindh, and Indian Punjab, Haryana. That cloud rises and brings haze all over the Himalaya. It also leads to glacial retreat. But last year, that haze curled around over the Bay of Bengal, reached Colombo and reached Malé. It may not have impacted your economies and agriculture the way it impacts the Himalayan region, but just to show that we're all now in it together. When the oceans rise, Maldives will disappear, Sri Lanka and the entire Indian coast, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Why can't we talk about it on a South Asian plane? And since we already have SARC, why don't we do it? Which is where the new government in Sri Lanka must be engaged with this topic. It should be. Last point I will make is just about China and India and the so-called need to balance. There is no balance that can be brought about. This must be independent relationships of, let's say, a Colombo with Beijing and with New Delhi. And all of us have to band together to tell Delhi, we're all your instinctive friends. All South Asian peoples in surrounding countries are, as I use the term, default friends of all of India, including New Delhi. So to begin with, New Delhi should not be too nervous when neighboring countries have relationship with South Asia, because, as I've said often, already the Chinese economy, India's largest trading partner is China. And whereas India would not want Nepal to have hydropower plants that have even an iota of Chinese investment or even a contractor hired through international bidding. So that is very short-sighted, and that is not what neighbors do to each other. And so if India can generate confidence, New Delhi rather, can generate confidence from the fact that the neighbor mean it no harm, there is no ganging up, then we can all have independent relationships, which will be for the better of India and all of us.
Thank you, Kanak. Give me a second. Yeah, okay. There was a question from Shalek Khan, but I think Mr. Khan, Mr. Dixit has more or less answered your question indirectly. But since Kanak also has to leave and our time is running out, I need to end this. But this has brought some other ideas to my mind. Of course, we were trying to talk about the Sri Lankan presidential election and its and possible consequences for South Asia. But we have also brought this conversation to another point, and that is foreign policy and relationship with states. I think we need to do another conversation about this, because what both Kanak and Professor Muni were saying is, and also what Mr. Khan has said here in the chat box, is pretty important. And I did say that it's not that NPP hasn't talked about foreign policy. It's just very skeletal and utterly commonsensical. That doesn't, it cannot take this country in the direction that you are talking about. It wouldn't take the country in the direction when I both would want it to when it comes to this. So my suggestion is that most of us have known each other for a very long time and have ideological resonance with a lot of these things. So maybe another thing that should come out from Colombo, whatever the result of the election, is about the South Asia business, about how is it that we have relationships that are not dominated or overshadowed by somebody else? How do you create a set of relationships that are independent but not hostile? And how is it that then that we are not necessarily part of somebody else's foreign policy, but that we are committed to our own interests, but right now without also not being hostile to others. And this needs to be done. And if I was an advisor to the new government, which I'm not, this is the kind of thing I would have talked about. And I also think that the conversations on South Asia has to now move to someplace else. It cannot be just Delhi, because it has to go to a place like Kathmandu or Colombo, or maybe both, where the conversation will be probably. Oops. My battery is running low, so I should end this.
Oh, it did end. Professor Muni, goodbye. Pradeep, goodbye. I think we've been abandoned. As he did say, let us do it, Professor Muni. Let's do it in, let Colombo catch its breath. Let's all meet in Kathmandu. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Most welcome.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, then. Bye-bye.
You take the initiative.
I will do that. I will be in touch with you.
Okay.
I'll be in touch with both all of you and Sasanka, the dear departed Sasanka. Goodbye.